Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to another edition of the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We're part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today in a surprise episode, Seabass of WNWS of Jackson, Tennessee. Seabass appears on the guest line that is presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number, 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Now on to our interview with Seabass. Seabass joins us for, I guess, a surprise visit. My friend is busy these days, but I guess in the case of 53-point wins, you find a little time for your friend, huh?
Well, yeah, I thought I might as well make a little time for a 53-point winner. How you doing, friend?
We have not had many of those, have we, to cover?
We've not had any of those that I know of, so...
It's funny. We've been doing this podcast we're right at an 8-year anniversary on it now. I mean, at times it just, you have these internal jokes yourself, and I've just thought for a while, like, this should be the baseball and disasters podcast, because that's basically been like the material during the 8-year history of this. But yeah, this may be starting to turn the page. I had spoken to a group of people last week. I said, I don't know when this is going to start, but it might not be this year. Maybe, who knows, maybe it's not till the end of next year. But I felt like at some point the program would start to turn a page to where they just wouldn't be a pushover all the time anymore. Right. And maybe that's what Saturday was.
Well, look, of course, one step at a time, we all understand that. But any Commodore fan who has any seasoning on them in regards to how long they've been following Vanderbilt athletics, if you saw what we saw on Saturday, that was unlike anything that I can remember. And not only that, let me say this. A lot of people will say to you, I haven't seen anything like that since the Franklin era. Here's what I'm going to say. Now, don't confuse that with me saying this is better than anything you saw, because it's Hawaii, and we know that Hawaii is going to be very bad. We understand that. But, Chris, I watched every game in the Franklin era, and there were some awesome games. They were a lot of fun. But never, not once, not even once did I see that level of intensity across the board, special teams, offense, defense, and I won't say fourth quarters because we did not start great. We all know that. But the level of intensity, linemen finishing, defensive players swarming to the football, even if they have nothing to do with the tackle, on every freaking play, I didn't see that in the era, not in the Franklin era, not like that. I'm not calling it that, and I'm not going to say we're getting those results. But what you saw Saturday night was a learned product that has been ingrained in this team. That didn't just happen. They weren't just hyped up because it was the first game of the year. They were taught that. And not only were they taught that, they reflected it. And that is such a great sign. I don't care who we're playing at. If we go 1-11, if I get that effort every week, then it's just about a talent gap that will close a little bit, hopefully. But I don't think I've seen them out of that, an effort like that out of a Vanderbilt team in a very long time.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I think the 2012 Tennessee game had that kind of edge and feel to it. But I know what you mean, because I thought it afterwards. It just felt that they played with an edge that we had not seen in a while. I mean, in Mason's team, the one that beat Tennessee, the Tennessee team that was headed to the Sugar Bowl, what was that, 16? Played with a little bit of that spark too. But you may well be right about it, A, and B, they've been few and far between, even if you're not.
I mean, we just played with the type of swagger that we usually see out of the teams we're playing.
Right, right. That's exactly what I thought when I watched it. Like, I've seen a lot of teams come to Nashville and sort of carry on their business that way.
And it's little things like this. And I think I either said this to you or I might have. I was a little more chatty in the game thread than I normally am. By the way, Chris, what was it? Over 800 posts in the game thread.
Well over 800, and I know we did start the game thread a day early, which I'm going to try to start doing. I just think that people are talking about the game on Fridays anyway, and that and B, on game days I get busy. I've got stuff to do. I'm trying to get out the door. I'm dealing with kids, and sometimes if I don't start it on a Friday, I get to the stadium, it's 10 minutes till kickoff, and I remember, I didn't start a game thread. So that's probably going to be more of a regular thing. But, yeah, we had, 800 and something posts, and I think over 10,000 views on that thread. And by the way, it's a private message board, so you can't get in and read it or post on it unless you subscribe to our community. So it's not getting that boost from trolling opposing fans or whatever that looks like.
Right, yeah, and that's a great point. But I was pretty active in it that one, or at least for me anyway. And like I remember there was one post, and it wasn't calling them out by any stretch of imagination, but it was when there was a pass breakup in the end zone that thwarted a touchdown by Maxwell Worship, and the inference was, well, we got lucky on that one. And I immediately thought that was a phenomenal play. Zero to do. That was preparation, and that was execution of a play. I mean, it had nothing to do with luck at all. And you talk about being in the right position, making the play, and so many times we have found the way not to do that. And here's another thing that I was talking about in those threads, and that was the ability. I mean, look. We don't have what you would consider to be elite pass rushers by any stretch, and we haven't for a while. But what I loved about that, and remember, if you kept listening to that game, the one thing that Hawaii should have been able to do well was, the offensive line execute. It was, if they had an experienced unit, it was that.
Yeah.
And I love the way that Vanderbilt's defense manufactured pass rush from different areas of the defense, all the time, kept Hawaii guessing, didn't really know what was coming from. I mean, it could be interior, it could be stuff, it could be off the edge. It might be Orgy creeping up at the last second, or him, not disguising, getting in there and try to get that little A-gap blitz up the middle. Whatever it was, man, it worked. Everything they were doing, they not only manufactured a pass rush, but they did it in multiple ways and with multiple players. Will that carry over to other teams? I have no idea, but I know it did on that night.
Mason's defenses were so uncreative. And last year, I mean, as much as I thought Jesse Minter did a pretty good job, they didn't really do a lot of that stuff, or if they did, it didn't really succeed. This was more like watching one of those, fill in the blank with Woody Woodenhofer or Bruce Fowler or, good grief, who was Franklin's DC? Bob Shute.
Shute, yeah.
When they just used to send guys from all over the field and they had guys on their heels when it was really working. And look, it is Hawaii. That team's got to be beyond dysfunctional. So I don't want to take too much going forward from that. I just know what I saw in that game, and the part that they could control, I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, it was their habits. I mean, yes, they were far superior physically. We understand that. And then, like some of those runs in the third quarter, there was nobody there.
Right.
Yeah, hey, and that is what it is. But it's the habits. Everything – is in the game of football becomes a habit, and not all of them are bad. Not all of them are good. But that's what I was talking about. We may not be the most impressive Vanderbilt team I've ever seen, but the effort, the habits, the execution, everything about it, that final 3 quarters in Hawaii was some of the most fun I've had as a Vanderbilt fan. With still no illusion of what we are or are not as a team right now. I have no way of knowing that. But I promise you, Chris, even if the result is a 42-10 loss to Georgia, but that is the way that they play, I promise you I'm going to live with that. I'm going to live with that, because the only thing that we could ever ask as fans, or whoever your team is max effort on the part of the coaches and the players, because you're never going to get your A game all the time. Nobody has their A game all the time. Even Alabama and Georgia don't have their A games all the time. Their talent just wins out in most cases, But I just really don't know how they could have played better in those last three quarters. I really don't.
Well, I mean, they took their foot off the gas in the fourth.
But that even lends itself to what I'm talking about.
Well, I thought that the backups on defense came in and played really well, and the offensive line did too. I mean, that was a point of concern, and again, it's probably got a lot to do with who they played. But even when they went to reserves on both sides of the ball, it didn't seem to matter.
No, and they emulated the same things as their starters. That's my point. They played the same way. They may not be as physical or as good, but they executed the same game plans. They've been together, practicing, working every day, doing the same drills. But what they did looked like the way they had been coaching the starters and the way they'd executed. That's it. I mean, I know it may sound like I'm going overboard with this, and I'm not sitting there screaming, "We want Bama." I just love to see football executed that way out of teams, and we never do that. And so we did, and it was just about as refreshing as anything I can remember in a long time.
Well, you probably read all my practice reports, and I don't mean this as a pat on my back. I mean it as I'm looking for things that line up on the field when they play with what I saw in 18 practices in August. Well, and I guess a couple of those were in July to be exact. But the point is, like, a lot of the themes that I wrote about were things that you saw on the field. And I think the thing that I was most, I guess, putting stock in terms of improvements, I felt that the back seven had a chance to be a good bit better. And I think that's exactly the way that it played out.
Oh, there's a bunch of them, Chris. There's a bunch of them. I mean, we look, we can highlight the people. We know the names, but I mean, think about this. Because if Max Worship's going to play like that all the time, and DeRicky Wright is going to play like that all the time, to go along with guys like B.J. Anderson, of course, Jalen Mahoney. I mean, and I don't want to leave anybody out. And some of these youngsters, and of course, when Trudell Berry gets to play, maybe he'll have a role in here. I don't know. But these guys that are out there and they're doing it, man, I mean, a lot of times when we've had a decent secondary, you have like one, maybe two good areas, and then, maybe one of the corners is not so good, or one of the other safeties is lacking a little bit, but the other two are pretty good, and it kind of levels out. Chris, they got a chance to be big, strong, rangy, fast, experienced, in all facets of the secondary.
Here's the other thing. I remember in the past, people would say preseason, I'm worried about the linebacker play, and I would say I'm not as worried. I think that they've got more players there than people perceive, and I'm more worried about other things. And then the season would come, and this is during the Mason era. This is not other eras. Right. And obviously Zach Cunningham would be an exception. After he left, it just dropped off a cliff. And I would say, well, I think their linebackers should be better. And I remember we had that podcast 2 years ago, where Dimitri Moore had been forecasted as a potential first-round pick, which was
I remember telling you about that.
Yeah, I know. That's the most ridiculous project. I mean, we were both like, what? And that's exactly how it turned out. But point being, linebacker has just, I mean, I doubt there's been a Power 5 program in the country that has had worse linebacker play than they've had since Zach Cunningham left. And now that they're at a point where you look at them and you say, okay, you feel pretty good about Anthony Orji. And Ethan Barr, I still think Kane Patterson is their better option. And I think that's back to an or this week with he and Barr. But either way, either either Kane Patterson earns that job or he doesn't, which means Ethan Barr has picked up his level of play. And either way, they've got some depth there. And I'm telling you, I really like Langston Patterson too, and Truesdale played pretty well. That's the best linebacker play they've had in a while. And I want to, again, suspend judgment to say that's like some star-studded group until I see more. But again, it was the trend that you saw that I thought carried forward from fall practice.
And look, and you said it, because you're going to say what you see. I mean, that's who you are, and that's what you should do. And I don't recall. I mean, look, they had bad days in camp. There's not a team that doesn't, but I don't recall any. They look lost. They look flat. They're terrible. They're getting smoked. I mean, you didn't come out and say, you ain't gonna believe what we're about to do. This team's awesome. But you could tell that you could tell that you had seen a measured improvement in the team that you saw, maybe even in the spring.
Yeah, I did, and I think you could tell that, and I would always try to clarify. The only time I went with off-the-rails excitement was over the punter, Matt Hayball, and I think you saw that in his one punt.
Oh, man, that dude. May he get little exposure for one of the opportunity this year, but it is great to – I mean, man, if you can just sit there consistently flip the field, Chris, I mean – How amazing is they give you such a better opportunity? How many times have we seen Vanderbilt defense start a possession and the other team is bare minimum their own 40?
I mean their special teams have not been very good for some time.
Yeah, and constantly having to work around it. And there's another one for you, special teams. I thought the coverage, kickoff coverage, when they did get to running back, I thought it was excellent. I mean, I really struggle. Other than that curious the two things that I like, and they were all in the first half. I almost flipped out on Mike Wright throwing the ball out of bounds on fourth down.
That was just a bad.
That's ridiculous.
And see, that's where I'm.
Scenario when that's okay.
Yeah, and that's where I did not see anything that really allayed my fears of their passing game, which is still, in my mind, a very legitimate concern.
Well, and I agree with that, but here's what I would tell you. Here's what I would say, and he did certainly make up for that. But here's what I'd say about Mike through the air, okay? I can't, at least off the top of my head, I know the game's been almost a week, but off the top of my head, once he got in that rhythm, and then the whole team got going, I don't remember a whole lot of throws in which he threw behind the receiver or totally missed somebody that he should have easily been able to connect with or didn't see somebody downfield. I thought he did a good job of distributing the football, and I mean, there wasn't like this monster pass rush because it's kind of hard to do that to Mike Wright, but I mean, I felt like he surveyed the field pretty well, kept his eyes downfield, and for the most part found his people, threw him catchable balls. And other than throwing it out of bounds on fourth down, for the most part, I thought he had a solid game through the air. Was it 13 of 21? I think it was. No interceptions, 2 touchdowns through the air for what was it? 143, something like that. Yeah, that. I mean. And they, by the way, could have been a lot higher than that, and we both know that. But I didn't see a lot of what would consider just to be, what were you doing type of throws,
He had 3 really bad throws. One was the fourth down one that you talked about where he just threw it out of bounds. One was he missed Will Shepard pretty badly. I think it was Shepard. On another fourth down play, and then another one was when he threw the ball right to a linebacker or a safety, and I mean there wasn't a Vanderbilt player within 10 yards where he just saw something that wasn't there or didn't see something that obviously was there or whatever bow you want to put on it. Okay. And look, the numbers did get padded by Jade McGowan and just some easy, they're basically handoffs that are scored as pass plays. But I mean, the other side to that is he can run. I mean, and everybody saw that. And he is going to make some plays against good defenses. I just am worried. They stick 9 in the box and say, okay, beat us. And I will say one more thing. His throwing lanes were better against Hawaii. They were more open than what I saw in practice most of the time.
Right now, well, hey, here's to hoping that's because he was facing a rock-solid defense. How about that? Now, we'll see if that's the case. And it was a little jest, but not really. Not really. And I think that's a great point about the throwing lanes. I mean, and something else. And boy, how bad have we wanted this? And that's to see our tight ends involved in the offense. And they clearly were, and they clearly seem to be part of the plan, especially for a quarterback whose game is not downfield, on that third level.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, they can survive like that. I mean, it would be ideal if he's able to do that a lot, past the intermediate this year. And I'm sure at times he'll be able to. But getting Gavin and getting Ben involved in this game plan, to me, man, that can only help. And I'm not just talking about in a blocking role, which, by the way, they were amazing at that too. But getting them involved in the passing game, I think it's paramount. And you know what? Here's the thing. A lot of the times, I would say that because it was so necessary, because we didn't have what you would consider pass catchers. Man, I'm going to tell you something. If Quincy Skinner continues to play like he did, we know what we have in Will Shepherd. Body, guys like that, Jaden McGowan, and, getting him involved in things like jet sweeps and stuff like that, and in the short hitches and letting him do his thing in open space. He doesn't need a lot. We both know that. Man, I just and then you have right behind you, of course, Ramon Davis is going to be excellent. He's just a really good running back. And, the explosion that we saw out of Rocco Griffin, man, tell you now, man, that's so much more from an option standpoint for a Vanderbilt quarterback than we're used to having. So we'll see.
The thing that I think is sort of occurring to me in this conversation, and look, I'm not saying any of these guys are all SEC players, although I think Shepherd could be at some point, and Ray Davis could be too, although probably not in this league this year. My kids are going crazy outside my office. I don't know what that's about. I think just the number of guys that I think can catch the ball. They've got Shepherd. They've got Skinner, presuming he's healthy, which I think he is. They've got McGowan. They've got Body. I think that Ezra McAllister could help them at some point this year. Wilson Long.
Tried to tell you and everybody else about that kid.
Well, yeah, but health, and that was not a small concern. So, and when he came back in camp and started playing, it was very sudden. I mean, I didn't have any warning that was coming. So there was that. I mean, you've got a couple of tight ends who can catch the ball. You've got, I don't know, 2 or 3 running backs at least who can catch the ball. They didn't really do as much of that as I thought they would, but that's something they've got in their back pocket. And if you want a deep, deep sleeper, I don't know how much he'll play this year or how much he'll catch the ball, given they've got a couple of tight ends and maybe 3 in Ball who can catch it a little bit. But I think Cole Spence is going to wind up being a really good player for them too. And you may see that flash a little bit at some point this year. I'd be a little surprised if he doesn't get into a few games. I don't think he played at all against Hawaii. And maybe they may be saving him. I wonder, because he really, really came on late in camp.
Right. And think about this. I mean, now that's not it. There's another name we're not mentioning because he didn't play because he was suspended. But Smith, Smith continues to be part of that rotation as well. And Logan Kyle, I mean, I think he might be capable, later in games and maybe help him out a little bit. Yeah, man. I mean, that's kind of what I'm talking about, man. This team, they have options, And the best part about it is, the very best part about all of this is that, and especially after getting to meet Coach, and really seeing what he was all about, is they emulate their coach. And in this case, that's a great thing.
because I could say to you, the last couple teams have emulated their coaches too, and did it, and the product showed. But I'm not ready to give Coach Lee the national championship coach, but I'll tell you this: it's so hard to do what it appears he's on the road to doing. You know what I mean? It's one thing, and I'm gonna tell you something. I heard somebody talking on the TV last night, and they were talking about no, it wasn't. It might have been your one with Corey. I don't know. I'm not sure. I heard it the other day though, and they were talking about how gung ho and ready Clark was when he got that job. When he went in and addressed that team for the first time. But what Clark Lee told me was as ready and anxious as he was to do that, was that he couldn't believe just how bad the situation really was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to throw apathy out there, but that it was just.
Oh, I think apathy is appropriate. I really do.
That it was worse than he really expected and worse than he thought. And to see how quickly a lot of those same exact players that were there, now they're maturing and they're growing and they're older now, have bought in, because it didn't come in the form of wins. That team won 2 games last year. I think 2, right? Won it 2? Were they 2-10?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they won 2 games. I mean, and the result looked a lot the same. I'll put it to you like this. If that team that we had last year played the Hawaii that's playing this year, we would have beaten Hawaii still, but we probably beat Hawaii 28-14. Struggle here and there.
Yeah,
maybe
I agree. I do.
This team was out for blood, and they buried them. And the best part about it now, do I love personal fouls from over-aggressive offensive linemen? Yes. Yes, I do. Now, if you continue to do it and it costs you in huge games and in big situations, no. But they did that because of a mindset. They've been coached by Blazek to finish. And then when you're done, finish some more. Make sure that they know who they're dealing with and what they're in for the rest of the game, because they tried to send that message on the first freaking drive, remember?
Yeah.
And they never let that up. And that's what I'm talking about. They didn't just wake up and decide that's who they were. That is something that they had to accept. They had to accept the information and do and execute it. But that came from that staff. That came from Clark Lee. And it is very difficult, especially today, to get an entire team of people who are used to losing to have that mindset to say, I don't care what the past was. I don't care what you're used to. I don't care what old habits we used to have. This is a different program. That's not how we operate. This is how we operate. And if you're better than us and you have more points on us at the end of the day, it'll be because you earned it, because you're not getting it.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. Well, here's one thing that I think was big, and I think this is really where it fell apart for Derek Mason. I feel like they had really, really good player leadership in, what was it, 17 or 2018, the year that they went to the Texas Bowl. I thought Bruno Reagan, Shermer, and if you want to go a little earlier than that, Trent Sherfield maybe too. So I think that I don't think they really had much of that when Clark came in. and they named 8 captains, and I'm trying to see. I can't remember Ray Davis. I'm thinking Ray Davis isn't one of them, and they've got 8. And Ray's a guy that I think has got some leadership ability. So that's if I'm wrong, my apologies. But that's like a good thing if you've got a guy who's a leader who isn't one of your captains too.
Yeah, that's right.
But here's, I guess I'm losing my train of thought here. I know where I was going to go with this, and I apologize if I've told this on the podcast before. But maybe some people didn't hear it, and it bears repeating. I think that, and I don't want to ascribe this to him incorrectly, but I think they would. I think if Clark Lee were on the show right now, he would pretty much back this up. And I used this story when I wrote the preview in Lindy's that I wrote. I do that one every year for Lindy's magazine. I think that he knew in the spring. He told a story about. I think this is before a Saturday scrimmage, and he wanted his players to get some rest, and he's in his office or walking down the street or something, and he hears a commotion in the stadium, and he looks over, and he's got like his whole defense out on the field, and it's like an hour or an hour and a half before they're supposed to scrimmage, and he's about to get on the phone and light into somebody and say who ordered this early show up when I wanted these kids to get rest. And then he found out that those players had called that meeting early on their own to get out there and get in some extra prep, which, that changed his whole attitude. And he said, that's when I started to feel like our message and our leadership was getting to where we wanted it to be. And I think it's hard to understate the importance of that. I think you're starting to see that play out, and certainly in terms of enthusiasm and the things that you talked about, I think that had a lot to do with it.
I think so. I mean, football is physical chess. There's no doubt about that. But when you hear football players say about how much the game is mental, it sure is. It just is. I mean, you got to have the horses. Duh. Everybody knows that. There's a reason Bowling Green doesn't play for national championships. But you got to have the mindset to go along with it, man. And I haven't seen that out of a Vanderbilt football team in a decade. Just hadn't seen it. I didn't see it last year. I think it was too much to overcome. I think 2021 was impossible to judge Clark Lee, honestly, at the end of the day, if we're truthful about it. But the early returns, if they're any indication of where they're headed, if not just the production, but the mindset and the way that those kids, what does he always say? Well, here's an example of what I mean. I hate that it happened. I hate that it happened because I had such high hopes for both of those players. But with the removal of Edwards and Martin, I mean, I love the fact that Clark Lee didn't blink. Those are two phenomenally talented young men. I mean, I've really had a lot of hopes for Maurice Edwards. And, look, I mean, I know Daniel was still trying to find a position, who he was, what he was going to be and where he, I know he wasn't a factor in camp or anything like that, but he does have a skill set that does play at an extremely high level. And Clark didn't blink. You got to go. I mean, this we have a certain number of scholarships for kids around this country, mainly in the South, but to be a part of this program and actually not just in words, but actually live out the experience of what it means to be a football player at this institution. And you're either going to fit that bill or you're going to hit the door. It's really that simple, I mean, and if you're Clark Lee and you're that coaching staff, what do you have to lose? I mean, you're not. This is not a program who's been on top and they're worried about it. Look, they have a way, and they know what it is that they want. And as sorry as I am to see those two go, if by September of their freshman year, their true freshman year, if they weren't that standard, then they needed to go. I hate it. I hope they do well, but I love the fact that Clark Lee wasn't playing that game. I do. I love the fact that he made that statement and made it known, you know. And if that's something that you can't live with, then you shouldn't be there anyway, because it's not for you.
You mind if I respond to that for a minute?
Do I mind?
Yeah.
It's your podcast.
Okay, I will start with the negative take of it. Those are two talented. Martin had not shown up yet. Edwards, maybe it was starting to a little bit, but he wasn't. He was the third best back on the team at best, I think, and a little small. Now, what I wonder is, thorough as they are, like, I don't know if there was a hole in their process that they missed, or that's just what happens when 18-year-old kids get to campus. And by the way, these kids, I don't know the whole story. I know some of it. It's not going to show up on an arrest record someday or anything like that. But a lot of people have, because of that, I said that on our board, you shouldn't kick the player off. Well, you don't know. You don't know how many times a rule was violated or what was said. I'm not privy to those conversations. There's only a few people that were. So I'm being sort of non-judgmental on the whole, should they have kicked them off or not kicked them off. I just don't know enough. I do know they're the ones that have to live with the consequences, right? They got to go out and find two more football players who are that talented. That's not always an easy thing to do at Vanderbilt. So I presume they're not stupid enough to think that the consequence of that isn't worth the negative consequence of keeping guys around who undermine what you're trying to do. And again, I don't think these are bad kids at all. I don't have any evidence to say that they are, but rules are rules. And if everybody doesn't follow them and kids don't have respect for stuff, then you got to go, or you're creating a distraction and a poison to your own team if that's the case. And Martin, I had not seen on the field, man, I'm probably going to say in 2 weeks, and I thought maybe I just wasn't looking. He and Bryce Cowan, one wears 48 and 49, and they're both built about the same, and I thought maybe I'm just, from a distance, I'm mixing the two. But I think in hindsight, I checked, Martin just wasn't out there a lot the last couple of weeks, which means you've done something to keep yourself off the field. So that had been brewing, I think, for a while. And Edwards, I thought it was interesting that Chase Gillespie had started to get a lot more carries than he had by the end of fall camp. I presume there was an injury or something like that. And I think to take it further, these guys both enrolled in January. So it wasn't like they got to campus and by the time it sunk in, it was too late. I mean, these guys were familiar with this is how it's going to be for a good 8 months now. Yeah,
that is a whole spring semester and summer. They you're right. They knew what it was, and I hate to see them go. And especially, with a guy, I know that can't be an easy decision for Clark. Is it the first time he's had to do it? I don't think there was one last year, right?
He's suspended to Ricky Wright.
Right. So that's right. And of course, Wright was able to come back on the team. The team wanted him back. But, in the case of a guy like Daniel Martin, Daniel Martin's from Marietta. Georgia's as you well know, a very important state to the Commodores. And, some of those coaches, those high school coaches in those programs, they don't care if you were right about it.
Yeah.
That's their guy, And I'm not saying that's the case here because I don't know that, but it could be, and, I know that can't be easy. If you're trying, it's already hard enough trying to get a foothold in that state, and we've done great over the years. But you want to be able to go back and cultivate those. And when you have to dismiss somebody from your program, sometimes the cost can be not maybe blackballed, but a lot harder for you to pull players from there.
Yeah,
but, you know what? You can't let that be the reason that you don't keep control of your program.
Well, look, I know that they are trying to attract NFL-type players, and that's what they need to do. Now, the difference between the guys that they'll have that make the NFL and the guys Georgia and Alabama have that make the NFL is their guys might be 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. After their senior year. Georgia's and Alabama's are going to be first-round picks after their junior year. Georgia and Alabama's are going to come in and be impact guys day one. Their guys may take a couple years to develop, and there's no way around that. But the other component to that is your culture and your discipline is going to have to be airtight, right? Your margin for error at Vanderbilt isn't big enough. And again, I don't know whether kicking those kids off was the right thing or the wrong thing. I just don't know enough to know. I know some, and I would presume those guys are smart coaches. They know all the things you just outlined, and to them, it's got to be worth it. But that is the thing, that the culture is what he's trying to create. And if you do have guys that are bucking that, it is going to be hard for you to win long term.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I support Clark Lee all the way into the season.
I've got one more observation, and I just wanted to throw this out there and let you reflect on it. I think the biggest thing I'm watching going forward, well, one is can they pass the ball? And I'm afraid I know the answer to that, and I don't think it's the one that people are going to want to hear. But where I'm really intrigued is, do they just look that much better in the secondary because they looked so bad before? Or are they really kind of sneaky good there? Because you know what I think of Jalen Mahoney. I thought Max Worship was maybe the most improved player on the team. I think you saw that translate, and Mahoney might be kind of right there with it. I think B.J. Anderson is really intriguing. You saw the speed. You saw the performance. B.J. Anderson was really good. Tyson Russell kind of emerged to take that corner spot, and I thought he was solid. And now you got DeRicky Wright on the field, who everybody knows is athletic enough to play just about anywhere. And by the way, C.J. Taylor in that mix too. He's
by the way, right?
Scored a touchdown. And by the way, that one, I think you saw what I had been talking about in camp. I'm really intrigued to see what that bunch delivers. And if you want to include the linebackers in that too, that's fine because they're part of the back seven. I'm very intrigued to see what these guys really are once they play better teams.
Yeah, and just the level of athlete. I mean, think about this. Think about what you're saying. There are very few years in which C.J. Taylor would not only start but easily be the best defensive back on the secondary, even as a first-year contributor. And he's not even starting.
Right.
I mean, he's going to play a ton because he's such a productive kid. But I mean, look, I think Max Worship. I mean, he took a horrible angle on that play in that first quarter. But dude, he didn't blink. I mean, he made up for it with that monster hit, forcing that turnover. And you got a guy like DeRicky Wright, who truly, I mean, of course he was playing linebacker. He looks like a linebacker. Who just happens to be on the back end, but you just think about some of the players on the back end of that thing. When you start talking about guys like Maxwell Worship and DeRicky Wright and C.J. Taylor, and then you look at these guys on the edge, and you mentioned, B.J. Anderson. I mean, we're starting to see, I mean, it wasn't too long ago. I mean, maybe even going into the spring, you're thinking, okay, this secondary has, Jalen Mahoney's got some potential, and then we'll see if we can build around some things like that. And now, he's just one of about 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 6 that have the chance to be extremely productive, and obviously now this team needs, Devin Lee and Davion Davis. I mean, they got to get back sooner than
Big
later.
Time,
because,
yeah.
I mean, that's going to have to happen, But I like what I saw out of Miles Cecil. He's not the biggest dude, but he's explosive. He's an explosive kid, And I look at some of the. Oh, and by the way, what kind of sin would it be if we did this podcast, talk about that game a little bit? I know that you and Corey and some others have talked about it, but man, if I don't mention Darren Agu, then who am I? I might not be a Vanderbilt fan.
He's a talented player. But can I – you know what? I want to – actually, you led me into the next thing I wanted to talk about. And obviously things don't work this way, but I wonder if you could go back a month and you're the coaching staff and you know you're going to lose Miles Capers for the season. You know you're going to be in pretty good shape with Mahoney and Worship at the safeties. And you know what C.J. Taylor has become. Could you move to Ricky Wright from anchor to star? And if people don't know the distinction, anchor is the hybrid linebacker / safety, while star is the hybrid defensive lineman / linebacker who plays off the edge. And by the way, if you look at the depth chart, right size isn't that far off some of the kids on the depth chart at that position.
I know.
Then you get Wright, who's maybe your most capable playmaker, in a spot where you can kind of turn him loose, and you get Taylor on the field all the time. Right. Now you're kind of thin at that position at that point too, but I mean you're already a little thin at star as it is.
Yeah, but just think about this for a second, Chris. Think about, you're talking about them Woody Woodenhofer defenses and some of those other defenses. One of the things that they had talent on all their levels.
They had speed.
Yeah, and look, I mean, think about it at the same time when you start talking about max athletes that this defense can put on the field with Worship, with Wright, with Taylor, with Kane Patterson, with B.J. Anderson, with Darren Agu. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's just not what we normally do. That's spreading. We have multiple potential playmakers. Yes. I mean, depth is the hardest thing to do. We always get a random good player and then one right behind them that's pretty good, and then a bunch of guys that are just out there. I don't see a lot of guys that are just out there on that defensive side of the ball. Now, we got, again, I mean, critical, that defensive line. It's if we're going to have success against the Missouri, South Carolinas, of the Tennessee, Floridas, Kentuckys of the world, then Ole Misses of the world, then they're going to have to be a presence there. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, if they can get that, if Davis and Lee can come back and we get some production, and look, Malik Langham's just going to have to take his game up. There's just no way around it. He has to do it. He
didn't appear on the stat sheet Saturday.
Yeah, he has to be a factor, a good one. Not a negative thing, but I mean, if we could hit on him, if he could come through, man, that a defense with all kinds of potential would take a huge step forward. And that's a lot of pressure. I get it. But you know what? You have that skill set. You've got that frame. And most of our players don't have that. So he's got to do it. We got to have that production from him. And hopefully we can get that.
You said you had about 45 minutes, and here we are at 46 minutes. So with that, I'm just curious if you've got any parting thoughts.
Let's go to the mailbag. Oh, wait, there isn't one because you don't love me.
No, I've done the mailbag with you a few times, and then you couldn't make it. So I wasn't going to tease our listeners like that. I was going to let this be a surprise podcast and just do it that way, because there have been several requests of where is this guy, and I've just said he's busy.
Man, you like me. You really like me. Oh, man. No, so you wanted to know if I had any parting thoughts?
Yes.
Well, first, I was wondering if you thought there was any chance that I could be happy tonight. And I know the answer to it, but is there any way Ball State puts up a fight tonight?
I don't see it.
I just can't see how either. But I can dream. Other than that, look, let's just go handle business. I don't want to hear any more about the plane ride. The plane's ride's over with. None of you got just time to recover. It's time to focus. And because let's just face it, if they go out there and lay an egg against Elon, then what was Hawaii for, right? But if this team goes out there and handles their business exactly as they did, and I expected it would be a tougher game than it was against Hawaii. Matter of fact, before I finish this, neutral site Hawaii and Elon, don't look up your numbers. I'm just talking about you. What do you think?
Elon.
By
2 touchdowns.
Okay. I was thinking something along the lines of that. So that's about what I feel like, too. We're playing a better opponent, but that doesn't mean we're playing a good opponent. This is a game that the Commodores should win. And look, they have the advantage most positions, and especially offensively and on the ground, they should be able to enforce their will. They should. Now, not having Hernandez, we'll see what happens with that. But I did read, and I think it was Justin that clarified that actually Castillo got a good chunk of gameplay in at center in that game, which that'll be important.
I'm glad you brought that up. I am concerned about center because I didn't see Castillo take any snaps in fall camp. No, I was told he was probably the most likely backup plan if something happened. And you saw me say a few times in practice reports, like, that is my biggest concern. Like, if they get somebody hurt at center, then God help them, because it could get ugly. But if he can handle it respectably, and Bramer played pretty well at right tackle, you can move Ashmore into guard. It may not be the disaster that I thought it would be. And I don't remember any hiccups with the snaps. Do you?
No, I don't remember hiccups at all after the first half.
No, there weren't. And I mean, I thought honestly they might have to play Grayson Morgan anyway at center, even if Ketchik didn't get hurt. Because right. I mean, it was ugly at times in fall camp at center when Hernandez wasn't in there.
Yeah, and of course, I was reading, I guess I didn't really notice it initially when it was happening that Bryson did play, and I think somebody commented that he had a pancake block on his first snap.
Yeah, they really like him, but he's got to get bigger.
Yeah, he will, because look, this is, what this is not, and this is not a shot at that former Commodore, because I thought he was actually a really good football player. He just never could put weight on, and that was Riley Lauer.
Yeah.
But this ain't that. I mean, Bryson's forum is his frame. He's going to be fine. He just needs the time to do it. I mean, I could see Grayson Morgan playing at 290 this time year from now.
Yeah.
And with his ability, and he's the type of offensive lineman, like I said, that, from a technical standpoint, that we tend to go against, and wear us out, the kind that knows how to use leverage that is, comes from a great program. And this is a kid with a monster amount of upside. So, but you're right. If he can't put that weight on, and sometimes that happens, then, his ceiling is pretty low.
Hernandez, I guess, has got technically 2 years after this. Let's see. Played one game in 2019. What's that?
What's the deal with Hernandez? What are we looking at here?
I do not know. I don't recall seeing what happened. That was one of those games that it's weird. Like in a blowout like that, I'm less tuned in late, and especially when the game's ending at 1 whatever in the morning, and I've got to get some sleep. I'm less looking around to see. Although I guess he got hurt kind of early, didn't he? And I just missed it. But anyway, back to where I was going. Hernandez played one game as a true freshman in 2019, which means he could redshirt for that. 2020, he played 5 games, started 4, but he gets the COVID redshirt no matter what he did. So that means last year technically could have been his freshman year, making this his sophomore year, if you want to go the full 6.
If he wants to. But has Coach Lee said anything about, is this I'm sure he'll just say week to week. Was that the comment for him?
Honest to God, I don't remember.
And by the way, I think there could be a modicum. Now, let's just say you're right, and Hernandez is going to be here for 2 more years at least. I don't think that's a roadblock for Morgan. I think they shift him out a little bit. I mean, the good thing about Grayson Morgan is he's got position versatility. It's a former high school tackle,
Yeah.
And with that frame, I mean, he could do a lot of things. I mean, I think he's an interior guy. I do. But, hey, that's a great deal. I mean, if this time next year your interior is something along the lines of Hernandez, Castillo, and Morgan.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they were planning to give him some shots there anyway. I think that Morgan wound up at center because it was that bad when Hernandez was out. Or when Hernandez, well, not out, but because he didn't miss any fall camp that I remember. But when you got to get backups reps, and it just was not pretty when they went to other options. I think that he wound up at center out of necessity more than plan. I could be wrong about that, but that's my perception of the situation.
Trevor Hoffman ended up in pitching out of necessity. And I mean, obviously, it's a little bit of jest there, but sometimes those moves, even out of necessity, end up being brilliant. You know what I mean? It ends up redefining them and maybe taking them to a level that they may not have achieved. So we'll see. I mean, but I like the fact that I do believe that. I mean, I don't think he's a tackle in college, but I do like the fact that he can play multiple positions on that line, especially at this early junction in his career. And even if it is out of necessity, I mean, hey, the dude's upside is tremendous. This is not somebody who was clearly not ready to play college football, but because we have nothing else, he's thrust into it.
Any closing thoughts?
Let's see. Do I have any closing thoughts? I don't know, man. I felt like we shucked it on down to the Cobb pretty well, don't you?
Yeah, and we'll have another one to talk about next week. And look, if they beat Elon, Wake's the most anticipated game, I guess, probably since the Texas Bowl of, January 2019?
Yeah. I mean, look, this is a preseason top 25. Of course, I mean, is that still the case without Sam Hartman? I don't know. Clawson's done an amazing job in Winston-Salem. The thing about it is that's one of the programs, Chris, and I think you definitely agree with it, that even though they don't play in a conference like we do, needs to be kind of a barometer of who we are.
Yeah.
And I say it's a lot easier to have success in the ACC than it is the Southeastern Conference because, duh. But, I mean, I think that's kind of a on par type of deal. You know what I mean? To take a look at that. Now, they should be able to do better than us with a lighter schedule than us. But, I think we need to be somewhere about on the par of a Wake Forest. And, by the way, on par with Wake Forest that played last year, you put them in the Southeastern Conference, they're going to win 3 or 4 conference games. And we've proven that at times we have the ability to do that, but, consistency is the key. Anybody can have a season or 2, but if you cap it with 10 terrible afterwards, then what are we really talking about?
Yeah, Wake is, I guess there's 3 teams on the schedule that play tonight, Wake being one of them. So I guess we get a first look at some teams down the road.
How does Wake have tonight?
I think it's an FCS game.
FIU? Is it FIU?
Oh, let me look this up.
I could be wrong.
Wake plays VMI.
VMI. I knew there was an I in there somewhere.
It was a 3-letter initial, right?
Man,
I'm not sure there's much difference.
Yeah. No, there's no difference. Yeah, well, you know what? I tell you what, I had a good time. I was glad I was able to do this. I know I don't get to do it very often, but I was glad I had a little time to sit back and do that.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
Was it all you ever dreamed of and hoped for?
And some.
And then some.
And then
Man,
some.
Heck yeah. All right, big guy, let's wrap it up then.
Yeah, let's do this again. Hopefully you're available next week.
Well, I ain't speaking to that. There's no way I can commit to it. But if I am, I would love to do it.
Well, we hope to see you then.
Hey.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.